Ethan Carter, a wealthy and self-assured man, accepted a bet that would unexpectedly alter the course of his life. Accustomed to success both in business and personal endeavors, Ethan thrived on competition. During an extravagant party in Manhattan, his close friend Ryan posed a daring challenge that immediately caught Ethan's attention. With a sly grin, Ryan leaned in and said, "Let's see if you've got the courage to win this one, Ethan. I bet you wouldn't dare to marry someone who's not your usual type." Ethan, known for his history of dating stunning women, was momentarily stunned, but his competitive nature wouldn't let him back down. Raising an eyebrow, he asked, "And what's the reward?" Smirking, Ryan lifted his champagne glass. $1 million to the winner, if you marry her and stay together for 6 months. The thrill of the challenge, combined with the promise of a financial incentive, was too enticing for Ethan to resist. Without a second thought, he accepted. The woman Ryan had chosen was Harper Collins, a confident and unconventional individual who defied traditional beauty standards. Though Ethan had never met Harper, to him, it was just another opportunity to claim victory. A few days later, Ethan received more information about Harper. She was confident, independent, and fiercely strong-willed, completely unlike the women Ethan usually pursued. This only heightened his curiosity. Being someone who thrived on control, he found himself wondering how he would handle someone who wasn't likely to yield to his demands. Their first meeting was arranged at an upscale restaurant. When Harper arrived, Ethan immediately noticed how different she was from anyone he'd encountered before. She seemed entirely unfazed by the opulent surroundings or by his commanding presence. Instead, she locked eyes with him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "You must be Ethan Carter," Harper said matter-of-factly as she took her seat. "And you must be Harper Collins," Ethan replied with a measured smile, extending his hand. Harper hesitated briefly, but then clasped it in a firm handshake that exuded confidence and resolve. "Let's not waste time," Harper began, her tone frank and direct. "I know why we're here. I know all about the bet, the terms, and the conditions." Ethan was taken aback by her candor but kept his expression neutral. "And yet, you still agreed to meet," he said, intrigued by her reasons. Harper paused, studying him carefully before answering. "Let's just say, I have my reasons. I'm not naive, Ethan. 6 months might sound short, but a lot can happen in that time. If you think you can manipulate or control me, you're mistaken," Harper said with quiet resolve. Ethan smiled. Harper was turning out to be more of a challenge than he had expected, which only heightened his interest. As their first meeting came to an end, Ethan found himself increasingly fascinated by her. She wasn't intimidated by him in the slightest, and that stirred not just his curiosity but a sense of admiration. In the days that followed, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about how to navigate the next step. He was used to being the one in control, the master of every situation, but now it seemed Harper had her own game plan. Their second meeting took place at a modest cafe, a stark contrast to the extravagant restaurants Ethan typically chose. Harper had suggested the location, and Ethan, intrigued, agreed. He wanted to understand her better and uncover the reason behind her willingness to enter what was essentially a temporary marriage arrangement. When Ethan arrived, Harper was already there, calmly sipping tea with a serene smile. This time, she greeted him warmly, a departure from the cool detachment of their first encounter. Yet she still exuded the same unshakable confidence. "I thought 5-star restaurants were more your style," Harper teased as Ethan took a seat. "Sometimes it's good to break the routine," Ethan replied, attempting to sound casual though he felt slightly out of his comfort zone. They exchanged polite conversation for a while, skimming the surface with small talk, but Harper soon cut to the chase. Setting her teacup down, she fixed him with a steady gaze. "If we're really going through with this, I want to establish a few things up front," she began, her tone firm but composed. "I'm not interested in your money or your luxurious lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months, and when it's over, I plan to leave exactly as I came." Ethan observed her carefully. She wasn't bluffing. He could tell she meant every word. Harper wasn't the type to see marriage as a stepping stone to wealth or social status, unlike many others he'd encountered. "So, what do you want, Harper?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "Freedom," she answered without hesitation. "I need you to understand that even though we're entering into this agreement, I won't let you control me. I have my own life, and that's not going to change just because of a temporary marriage." Ethan smiled faintly. Harper's answer wasn't what he had anticipated, but he didn't see any harm in granting her this freedom. To him, the marriage was a mere technicality, a means to win the bet. If Harper insisted on keeping her independence, it wasn't something that would bother him. "Fine," Ethan agreed. 6 months. After that, we go our separate ways." Harper studied him closely, as if trying to gauge whether he truly accepted her terms. She had entered this arrangement with a clear strategy in mind, determined to ensure everything unfolded as she planned. Deep down, she suspected Ethan might attempt to manipulate the situation, but she trusted her own strength to resist his influence. The meeting ended amicably, with both leaving confident in their defined roles. Harper would maintain her independence, and Ethan would keep the marriage strictly formal. Yet, as the wedding day drew closer, Ethan began to realize that this wasn't going to be as straightforward as he had imagined. The ceremony itself was cold and impersonal, more like a meticulously negotiated business contract than a celebration of union. Ethan, ever the strategist, believed he could maintain control through his material advantages. But from the moment Harper entered his luxurious penthouse, her demeanor made it clear she wouldn't be easily swayed. 6 months, Ethan. Not a day longer, she said firmly, walking past him to the floor-to-ceiling windows, her gaze fixed on the city below. She appeared entirely unimpressed by the opulence surrounding her. Ethan smiled to himself, his confidence undeterred. Resistance was nothing new to him. In fact, he thrived on it. But Harper's defiance wasn't typical. It intrigued him. Initially, Ethan tried to use his usual tactics to gain the upper hand. He manipulated schedules, orchestrated delays, and created obstacles in Harper's daily life, all in an effort to test her limits. Yet Harper stood her ground, unyielding and resolute, meeting every challenge with unwavering determination. As their interactions became increasingly tense, their relationship turned into a battleground. Small provocations erupted during trivial conversations, with Harper deflecting Ethan's attempts to assert control with sharp, calculated responses. It wasn't just her resilience that unsettled Ethan. It was the fact that Harper seemed to see through his wealth and power, rendering him vulnerable in ways he wasn't used to. The more he tried to break her, the more fascinated he became. Harper was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, and her ability to remain unaffected by his influence began to chip away at his defenses. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Ethan found himself alone in the penthouse's vast living room, staring out at the glittering city skyline. The view, which once gave him a sense of power, now seemed hollow. Jack's words echoed in his mind. "She'll change you, Ethan, whether you admit it or not." For the first time, he began to wonder if his friend had been right. When Ethan returned to the penthouse that evening, he found Harper sitting on the couch, engrossed in a book. She seemed completely unaware of his presence. "Can we talk?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence that had come to define their relationship. Harper looked up, her expression neutral but attentive. "What's on your mind?" Ethan struggled to find the right words, pacing the room in frustration. "I don't understand you, Harper," he finally admitted. "The more I try, the more I realize I'm not in control, and I hate it." Harper remained calm, her gaze following his restless movements. After a moment, she stood and walked toward him, stopping just a few inches away. Ethan's heart raced at her proximity. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice laced with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "This isn't about control." Her words unsettled him. The very idea that she could affect him so deeply terrified him. As the 6 months of their marriage drew to a close, Ethan found himself in turmoil. Harper was no longer just a means to win a bet. She had become an enigma he couldn't stop thinking about. One night, Ethan confronted her, desperate for answers. "I need to know the truth, Harper," he said, his voice filled with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Why did you agree to this? Why are you really here?" Harper sighed and set her book aside. Rising from her seat, she turned to face him fully, her eyes unusually expressive. For the first time, Ethan noticed a mix of emotions in her gaze. Pain, anger, and something deeper. "The truth?" she asked bitterly, crossing her arms. "You think you're ready for it?" "I need to know," Ethan insisted, his voice steady but his heart pounding. Harper hesitated before speaking, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan stood frozen, the weight of the penthouse's air pressing down on him, suffocating and stifling. It felt as though the world around him was crumbling. He longed to speak to her, to apologize, to offer an explanation for the inexplicable. But no words came. How could he justify something so heartless, something that had inflicted such deep pain? The truth was, he couldn't. In the days following her revelation, Harper's indifference was like a blade, cutting deeper than any outburst ever could. Yet, she remained silent. Without a word, she walked away, gently closing the door behind her. The soft click echoed in Ethan's mind, reverberating alongside the pain of being ignored by someone who had unexpectedly become much more to him than an adversary. This was foreign territory for Ethan. He had always been the one in control, the one who triumphed. Now the tables had turned. He was at the mercy of her silence, punished by her disdain. Each time she walked away, leaving him standing alone, the suffocating feeling of powerlessness intensified. And this was only the beginning. Desperate to bridge the growing chasm between them, Ethan tried again. His voice, unusually soft and almost pleading, broke the heavy silence. "Harper," he started, hesitating before continuing. "I know I've done terrible things. I've hurt you in ways I can't undo. But can we at least try to talk? Please?" Harper didn't respond immediately. She slowly closed the book she had been reading, deliberately avoiding his gaze. When she finally looked up, the icy coldness in her expression sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. "Talk?" she echoed, her voice laced with bitter amusement. "You think there's anything left to say? After everything you've done, you want words? Words are meaningless, Ethan." "I was wrong, Harper. I know that now." But his confession seemed to fall into an abyss. Her gaze remained unyielding, and her silence carried more weight than any argument. Ethan's frustration gave way to desperation. He tried everything he could think of to show Harper he was changing, that he wanted to be better. Yet every effort was met with either sarcastic remarks or, worse, complete indifference. One evening, after a disastrous meeting where a critical project had been sabotaged, Ethan returned home to find Harper on the phone, laughing softly. Her voice carried fragments of a conversation that revealed she was discussing his work decisions. It hit him like a ton of bricks. Harper was the one behind the recent sabotage. She was methodically dismantling everything he had built, piece by piece. But Harper wasn't seeking to ruin him all at once. Her revenge was precise, slow, and calculated. She wanted him to feel the sting of every small defeat, every glance filled with disdain, until all that remained was regret. Weeks passed, and Harper's cold treatment persisted. Once brimming with arrogance and confidence, Ethan was now a shell of himself, wandering the house like a ghost. He tried tirelessly to earn forgiveness he was starting to believe might never come. Each attempt to connect with her was met with those same cold stares or outright rejection. Her indifference gnawed at him, leaving him sleepless, haunted by the weight of his actions and the harm they had caused. Yet, amid the despair, something shifted within Ethan. He realized that words alone would never suffice. Apologies, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't undo the damage he had caused. Harper needed to see real, tangible change. One day, instead of saying anything, he left a simple bouquet of her favorite flowers on the kitchen table, with no note attached. He waited anxiously while she went for a walk. When Harper returned, she paused briefly at the sight of the flowers. Though her expression remained unreadable, Ethan saw her pick one up and smell it. It was a small, fleeting moment, but to him it was a sign, one he clung to desperately. He began to show his remorse through small, thoughtful gestures. Knowing she liked to drink something warm before bed, he started preparing her tea. "Here," he said one evening, keeping his voice even and calm. "I thought you might like this." Harper didn't say anything at first but accepted the cup. Her eyes stayed fixed on the city skyline outside. Ethan stood beside her silently, careful not to intrude. For the first time in weeks, the silence between them didn't feel unbearable. Felt as though, perhaps, the ice was starting to thaw. In the days that followed, Ethan continued his quiet acts of kindness. He didn't push, didn't demand anything in return. Slowly, Harper began to respond, even if only in small ways. She no longer rejected his offerings outright. She accepted the flowers, the tea, and even allowed brief, superficial conversations during breakfast. For Ethan, each tiny step forward was a monumental victory. Yet, he couldn't ignore the sense that Harper was still holding something back. She remained guarded, avoiding deeper discussions about their past or what lay ahead. Then, one evening, Harper finally broke her silence. "You're right, Ethan," she said softly, though her words carried immense weight. "I've been keeping something from you, something I didn't think I could say, but maybe it's time." Ethan felt his breath catch. He leaned forward slightly, his pulse quickening with both anticipation and dread. "Do you remember the company you destroyed?" Harper asked, her voice steady but laced with pain. "The one my father managed?" The room seemed to grow colder. Ethan's chest tightened as the pieces fell into place. He had destroyed not just a company, not just a family, but so much more. "Harper," his voice cracked, "I didn't know. I never could have imagined." Tears welled in Harper's eyes, spilling over as she looked at him with a mix of anguish and strength. "No, you didn't know," she said, her voice trembling, "because you never cared to. You destroyed lives, Ethan, and you didn't even notice." A long silence followed. Harper finally spoke again, her words measured and honest. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted. "What you did, it was devastating. But," she hesitated, as if weighing her next words carefully, "I see that you're trying. And maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that one day I can move forward. But it won't be easy. And it won't be quick." Ethan nodded, a mix of hope and despair flooding him. He knew the road ahead would be steep, but the possibility of a different future was enough to ignite a spark of determination. From that day forward, Ethan made a vow. He wouldn't just apologize, he would take action to right the wrongs of his past. He began reaching out to the families and businesses he had harmed, setting up programs to help them recover. He knew it wouldn't erase the pain he had caused, but it was a start. Harper observed his efforts from a distance, cautious but attentive. With time, she began to see the sincerity in Ethan's actions. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. And for Ethan, that was enough to keep him moving forward. She began to experience something unfamiliar, a growing sense of respect and admiration for Ethan, feelings she never thought she would associate with him. He was changing, genuinely changing, and it was becoming harder for Harper to ignore. One evening, after watching him quietly from the doorway, she finally approached him, her voice soft but resolute. "Ethan," she began, her tone steady but warm. "I think I'm ready to try. Maybe it's time to leave the past behind and start building something new." Ethan froze for a moment, her words sinking in before a wave of relief washed over him. He hadn't realized just how desperately he'd been waiting to hear those words. They meant more to him than he could have ever expressed. Harper wasn't just tolerating his efforts. She was willing to give them a real chance. Not as two people bound by circumstance, but as two individuals who were ready to begin anew. As the 6-month marriage agreement they had once begrudgingly signed came to an end, something unexpected happened. Ethan and Harper grew closer. Their once tense and guarded conversations gave way to genuine, heartfelt exchanges. They were no longer the same people who had entered into a forced arrangement. The bond they had formed was now rooted in something real, mutual understanding and love. One evening, as they sat together under the soft glow of the living room lights, Ethan reached for Harper's hand. "I love you," he said simply, his voice filled with sincerity. Harper's eyes glistened as she smiled. "I love you too, Ethan," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. "And I want to try. I want to build something with you, this time as equals, as a real couple." Those moments were pure bliss, a happiness neither of them had ever imagined possible. They had faced obstacles that once seemed insurmountable, and now they were ready to move forward together. The bitterness and pain of their past had been replaced with hope and a shared commitment to a brighter future. Months later, Harper began to notice subtle changes in her body. Morning nausea, unusual fatigue, things that felt out of the ordinary for her. After a visit to the doctor, her suspicions were confirmed. She was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but when she shared it with Ethan, his reaction left no doubt in her mind. He was overjoyed. Ethan's journey of change wasn't just about proving himself to Harper anymore. It became something deeper, about becoming a man worthy of her love and respect and being a father who would provide their child with the kind of stability and kindness he had once lacked. As they prepared for the arrival of their baby, Ethan worked tirelessly, not only to make amends to the people he had wronged in the past, but also to create a life of meaning and purpose for the family he was building. Harper saw the transformation in him daily, and her admiration for him grew stronger with every passing moment. On the evening of their wedding ceremony, this time a celebration of their love rather than an obligation, they danced slowly under the soft glow of string lights. Harper rested her head on Ethan's chest, the faint sound of his heartbeat soothing her. "Who would have thought," she whispered with a playful smile, "that all of this started with a bet?" Ethan chuckled softly, holding her closer. "Who would have thought?" he repeated, his voice filled with affection. As they swayed together, surrounded by friends, family, and the promise of a new beginning, Ethan and Harper knew they had finally found what they had both been searching for: a love worth fighting for and a future worth cherishing.